The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Greetings, everybody. We hope that you are well and in your highest state of physical, mental, and spiritual health, wherever and whenever you're listening. And we welcome you to another episode of the Pantsula podcast. I am Jesse here with my comrades, Jamilah, Salifu, and comrade Sadiq. The Pantsula podcast is brought to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which was started by Kwame Ture in 1968. And we believe in the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. If you have any questions about what this may mean, please leave a comment in this video, or you can head over to our website at AAPRP-intl.org. Before we get into our conversation today, wherein we are talking about primary and secondary contradictions, we will honor our ancestors. So, Comrade Jamilah, who are the ancestors we're honoring today?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, comrade. So our ancestors were, as all of our ancestors are crucial to the struggle we've had in our process of liberation as African people. The first comrade we want to honor is A-APRP, and she has passed recently in May. She has contributed to the arts in a great way. She has written the novel Our Sister Killjoy. She wrote a play called Anawa, and she discussed identity, post-colonialism issues, a lot of the things surrounding all of our experiences in that way as African people. She received the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best Book in Africa for the novel Changes in 1992. She was also honored with the Ganata Award for Literature in 2018, and that recognized her impact on literature in Ghana. Another one who has contributed greatly to the arts in one way or another is our dear comrade Mutulu Shakur, who has also recently passed. The one thing I really do want to acknowledge is the documentary Dope is Death. Have any of you seen Dope is Death?
I have not. I would love to see it though.
Yeah,
No, I never seen it.
Go see it, find it if you cannot, if you haven't seen it. So it is talking about the organized work towards community health, and it utilized political analysis in order to fuse that health. Tulu Shakur was participating in creating a program which had a detoxification through acupuncture. And so Dope is Death is something that covered that. I don't think when people talk about the work of the Panthers and the Young Lords and other organizations, there's not really conversation around the gender analysis that the Panthers had. Yes, there were a lot of contradictions. You're talking about contradictions today. There were contradictions, but there were questionings of those contradictions in terms of patriarchy, in terms of anti-queer sentiment. The Young Lords also collaborated with people like Sylvia Rivera. So we need to acknowledge that oppressive experiences, oppression on marginalized people, nothing happens on an island. Everything is interconnected. And the connection between racism and health disparities, that made the connection in a film like Dope is Death. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Mutulu Shakur was released from prison, but we all know when someone at that age is released from prison, it's usually like, whoa, you're about to leave this earth soon, so we'll just kind of let you go. It's really sad that it's a situation like that, but that is the truth of the matter. He was on lockdown. He was imprisoned, incarcerated, where you want to call it, for 36 years. In December 20 2022, he was granted parole. He was diagnosed with terminal bone marrow cancer. And like Marilyn Buck, like a lot of people, were granted a very short time to live and were released from prison. It's just amazing that the carceral system just doesn't take into account until you're on your last leg, or like, we'll release you then. But Mumia Abu-Jamal is still in prison. He is also in ill health, and yet he is still incarcerated. So we need to make all of these connections. I just wanted to leave here with a message from the Malcolm X movement. They said, Comrade Mutulu Shakur, veteran of the Revolutionary Action Movement, Republic of New Africa and Black Liberation Army leader, fighter, and political prisoner of 36 years. He passed on to the ancestors. We stay loyal to your path. Ashe.
Ashe.
Before we start this episode and talking about the primary versus secondary contradictions, we have a big announcement. Our comrade Jamilah, who's been a part of the Pantsula podcast and part of the Kaji Circle since its inception, is actually moving on. Just for those who are avid listeners of the Kaji Circle podcast, which is the Pantsula podcast, definitely wanted to make y'all aware. So if y'all don't hear our future episodes, that is the reason why. And we just want to definitely take time to thank her for her time in participating, joining, struggling with us. You know, she's been a big advocate of why we even have this podcast, a big part. You know, she definitely will be missed. But, you know, every now and again in the future, she would pop in on a few episodes and participate and help out. But, you know, just for those who are listening, just be conscious of not hearing Jamilah. You know, it saddens me to see her go. You know, she's been a part of the circle for 3 years since I've started, and she's a big reason why I'm where I'm at ideologically and whatnot, and just where I'm at in the party. So definitely gonna be missed for sure. So,
wait, can I say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that, you know, for people that are listening, I want you to understand that this is not like a selfish decision that Jamilah is making. She's not going to be a part of our circle anymore because she's going to deepen her work and her contribution to our people's struggle. And that is a objectively positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Fact.
Oh,
Fact.
goodness.
We're going to miss Jamilah because, as Sadiq mentioned, you know, when we started this podcast, a lot of us did not have any. I did have experience with YouTube and stuff, but like editing and just being challenged to have these conversations with the fear and, you know, the consistency of it. This is our 102nd episode. We've been doing this thing. So we definitely have to give you the due acknowledgement and gratitude for.
I'm doing this for the people. What does the theme song say?
Right. I'm not.
King, I'm the
a
servant of the people.
Servant of the
Not a
people.
queen, I'm a servant of the people. So just please, this is for the people. This is not for
Absolutely.
my
For folks who listen,
gratification.
folks that listen know that they're gonna just be, yo, what happened to Jamilah? So this is just a reminder.
I'll be back on once in a while to give my TED Talks. Don't worry.
So,
I do definitely want to give a TED Talk before we even get into the subject, though. I was thinking, should I wait on this? But I know we're talking about primary and secondary contradictions. It's really important to understand what's at the root of all of this, all of our ills, all of our oppression, all of what people go, why are people infighting? It's capitalism. That is the root of it. And then we have imperialism, which is under that umbrella. We have patriarchy, which is under that umbrella. And even under the umbrella of patriarchy, we have homophobia, transphobia, all of these things, misogyny. And so then we get into an even deeper rabbit hole, because I think the secondary contradictions is, you look at the celebrities and everything, turning to celebrities and what they think about the political situation. But I wanted to flip it on that because apparently there is this trend. Yes, people have always thrown things on stage. So that's not new. But apparently there is a trend where people are throwing phones and things like that on the stage. I want to just have a message to the folks who are making the decision to do that. My message to you out there is you're turning to the wrong person, because I'm sure all of you remember a little person, a journalist from Iraq.
Yes.
His name is Muzdahar al-Zaidi. Do you remember him?
The shoe.
Exactly. We need to take lessons from Mutahar al-Zaidi and utilize our energies for the fascists, utilize our energies for the imperialists, utilize our energies for the slumlords. That is who we need to utilize our energies. Don't pay money to go to a show and throw a phone at a singer.
Yeah.
That's the wrong energy. Yeah, maybe they're making more money than us, but at any moment, at a drop of a hat, they could be declared bankrupt. They could be declared not desirable anymore by the people who sign their checks. So they're the wrong person to focus on. We got to focus on the people who create these policies which oppress us. We got to focus on the Anita Bryants. I know like y'all are probably a little too young to know who Anita Bryant is, but she was a singer and she did this whole orange juice campaign. So now we're connecting with Florida. So she went on this whole raging homophobia campaign. And so while she was at a press conference, you can watch it, it's on YouTube. She's at a press conference and she got pied in the face. And then her response, you know what her response is? Because they were like, oh, they were about to arrest him or whatever. And they were like, no, don't arrest him. No, And she says, at least it's a fruit pie. That was Anita Bryant's response.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy.
So these people who are dangerous to queer people, these people who are writing up policy, as far as I know, right now, there are currently around 600 anti-queer policies on the books. Some of them have been created into law. You're focused on Harry Styles or Drake or whatever. That's what y'all focus on, throwing these phones.
All right. The singer Pink asked someone.
Throwing your ashes. That's what y'all are really focused on. So y'all are putting people on stage that people paid money to go to, and tickets are not cheap, by the way, in these days. Y'all are putting audience members in harm's way, and yet y'all are crying about trans people actually protesting in ways they need to and saying, you're doing it wrong? You're doing it wrong. You need to just sit silently and have signs. That's the same thing people said when African people were fighting for human rights. They called it civil rights. I'm not calling it. I'm calling it human rights. HR, man. Human rights, HR. Yes, I have PMA, positive mental attitude, because I think you need a positive mental attitude to deal with these fascists. Right. That doesn't mean you won't do anything. I have a positive mental attitude because I know that we're going to win against those fascists. But I am maintaining that y'all have the wrong energies, throwing phones at people, putting audience members in harm's way. People like Mutahar al-Zaidi. And focus your energy on the fascists, on the imperialists, on the slumlords, on the white supremacists. Y'all are sitting here defending and rationalizing these January 6 people, and yet saying like, oh, going out and going to go rioting and trans people and all of this, all this transphobia and transmania, and excusing white supremacists. So the other thing, Bill Gates, y'all know about Bill Gates. So he got pied in Belgium, and the news coverage for that, these people, it's like he got pied in the face. He's a billionaire that exploits labor. Y'all acting like they had something worse happen to him. I could think of something worse happening than a shoe or a pie. Mm-hmm. So y'all are focusing the wrong energies. Like, organize yourselves to fight against the Bill Gateses. Organize yourselves to fight against these forces of oppression. Because let me tell you something. As of the beginning of this month, you had people who were undocumented, who were like, well, if you can't get in Florida, do we need to say the state of Florida? It's always Florida. In the state of Florida, we had the fascists. That's what people call them, right? Ron DeFascist, he literally is creating anti-trans laws that target undocumented people. So, of course, whether or not they were undocumented, they left the state in droves, and that's going to affect labor. The cost of food is going to be more expensive. This happened in other states already, and then they actually had to pull back these laws because these people who complain about immigrants taking our jobs, They're not going to work out from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the sun. Let's keep it real. So this is going to affect the cost of produce. This is going to affect the cost of foods. So delivery drivers also are protesting Florida. So this is going to affect delivery costs. People hate queer people and African people and people who are not European so much they do not care about the end results of what's going to happen to even them. And this is what we really need to be thinking about. There's also in Iowa, child labor laws have rolled back. As starting the beginning of this month, like everything else, child labor laws have rolled back. So this is who we need to be thinking of. Y'all are focused on throwing phones at these singers or whatever, while child labor laws are literally rolling back. And we all know why this is happening. More and more people are leaving jobs because of conditions. I don't want to be treated inhumanely, so I'm going to leave the job. So people are leaving jobs in droves during the height of COVID. Still COVID, by the way. Let's not get that twisted. But these are laws that have taken effect in Iowa. I mean, we could talk about Mississippi, we could talk about Alabama, we could talk about Tennessee. This is Iowa, because Iowa was the major factor in the child labor laws. But here's more laws. Kim Reynolds, that's the governor. Oh my goodness. So the governor can decide on salaries for top state employees. The governor can make hiring and firing decisions without cause. There is an education reform law banning teaching gender identity in kindergarten through 6th grade. So any kid who is queer in those grades are going to be highly isolated. My question to these people who support this, so that means you can't even talk about people who are heterosexual. We all know they didn't think about that because they hate queer people so much. But again, you make these blanket laws, you got to follow it, right? So it says the bill also requires school libraries to remove some books from their shelves. The law it bans books with sex acts. So that means, are they going to ban the Bible? Because they have sex acts in the Bible. But of course not, right? It says the book restrictions don't have to be enforced till January. The child labor laws, there we go. It allows children under the age of 16 to work until 11 p.m. So they're going to school after that. In the summer, so what if they're going to summer school? And until 9 p.m. during the school year. So you're working till 9 p.m. and then you have to get up at 6 a.m. to go to school. This is what Iowa is doing right now, people. 16 and 17-year-olds can work jobs such as woodworking, operating a power saw, and demolition if they're part of an approved training program. It also allows that age group to serve alcohol in restaurants. So you can serve alcohol in the bar at 16 years old. We already know how people are when they're drunk. You're going to have drunk cis hetero men hit on 16-year-old girls. So this is what we have in Iowa right now. And this is from kcci.com, by the way. Harsh new penalties will begin for people caught dealing with the dangerous opioid fentanyl. A conviction involving 50 grams of fentanyl now carries as much as 50 years in prison. Okay, you have fentanyl, 50 years in prison. But yet, you can assault somebody. You know, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, slap on the wrist. A law that bans mail-in caucuses. So that one's interesting. It says Iowans will now be required to be physically present in order to participate in caucuses. The law will prevent Iowa Democrats from using a mail-in system, which they had hoped to implement as part of their new caucus structure. So that is Iowa. And again, we could talk about Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana. We could talk about all these states and Florida. That could be a whole episode. But we really have to think about the repercussions of these draconian laws, which also are going to affect cis people. They're going to affect heterosexual people in the long run. But you hate queer people. You hate trans people. You hate disabled people so much. You hate non-binary people so much that you don't even think about how that's going to affect people in the long run. And y'all are focused on trying to get famous on social media and throwing a phone at somebody. When there's real imperialists out here, people don't even care what's happening in Jenin right now. People are like, well, okay, you know, people need to defend themselves. So when Palestinians defend themselves, that's wrong. But because Palestinians are defending themselves, retaliation happens. And yet that's okay, and people rationalize it. So we're focusing on the wrong enemy, people. Stop throwing phones at these concerts and throw your organization around and focus on the actual enemy. I don't like Drake, but Drake is not my enemy, not in the way that George Bush is, not in the way that Ron DeSantis is, not in the way that Anita Bryant was, not in the way that all these senators are, not in the way that Biden is, not in the way that Obama was, not in the way that Trump, all these people, not in the way that Netanyahu is. Those are the real enemies. What did Sinead O'Connor say when she ripped up the picture of the Pope? Fight the real enemy. We need to fight the real enemy instead of trying to be famous on social media and focusing on these low-hanging fruit issues. So that is my TED Talk. I know I took 10 minutes of that, and now we are going to get to the subject at hand. Thank you for listening.
No, we appreciate the TED Talk for sure. Definitely used this a great, beautiful breakdown for sure. I think a good book to kind of outline, at least for me, everything you said, is a book that actually made me understand this concept of primary versus secondary contradiction. It's this book called On Contradictions by Mao Zedong. It's not even know if it's really like a book per se. You could even call it like a pamphlet, a few pages, but just his writings on contradictions. In a way, you kind of outlined it, but just to kind of give an example for people who are like, wait, so what is that, right? So obviously we understand contradictions to be positive and negatives. Obviously, primary being the more important or primary, you know what I mean, of importance in terms of contradictions versus the secondary, which is more so the latter half. So with that being said, an example will possibly like when you think of poverty, that is the byproduct of capitalism. So in most situations, the secondary contradiction is a byproduct of the primary contradiction. So a lot of the times we see in society where people are focused on, oh, we got to do something about these poor people or this houseless people, but don't really connect it to the primary contradiction, which is in society would be like capitalism or imperialism and whatnot. So my question would be to y'all is why does the Western media hyperfixate on secondary contradictions as opposed to primary contradictions?
It's like the Illuminati thing. So people go them, when we already have names for who they are.
I was just having this conversation. It's funny you mentioned the Illuminati because I was just about to mention the Illuminati because, you know, we're from that generation, at least I and Sadiq, Salifu, I'm sure you remember too, those videos, like that was just.
Oh man, in college, I was like sunken in that. Like that was my Jay-Z's in the Illuminati.
Yeah.
And
not acknowledging the relationship between these kind of like just first of all, signing a contract to a label that has all of your ownership. Who's able to make the music? Who's writing the music? And who's actually benefiting from the music? Yeah, that's a great example. I think the Illuminati. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that I was just having that conversation. So
I think what you're saying too with houselessness, where you hear a lot people saying, well, people are houseless by choice. You know, you can just go get a job. I don't know. People just talk about individual choice. And I think that's really ultimately what we're conditioned to see as the problem, that you can lift yourself up by the bootstraps if you work hard enough. Creating, you know, something like an Akon City, or, you know, talking about we need more Black businesses. We need to just have queer representation. So I think that this myth of representation also has a hand at totally sideswiping what the actual systemic issue is. So there's several angles we could go at this.
yeah, oftentimes you see like Western media like purposely do that. Oh, well, you know, 60% of Americans are too missed paycheck from being houseless, but then people would just think that like that just comes out of thin air, or like, oh, it's just because of Biden is in office that this is why this is happening. It's like, no, there's a system in place to ensure that you know that people are barely making it, right? Because it's a hierarchical society, it's a class stratified society. So when we talk about capitalism, and people oftentimes, even when we talk about in a sense of what's going on in Africa, what's happening in Africa around the world, like you said, in Janine and whatnot, people are like, what does that have to do with me? Right? Like people don't really see the primary contradiction. They kind of just hyperfixate on that secondary one. I mean, it's not just media, you know, also schools, that we've been brought up in kind of teach us to just focus on that and not like even when you're talking about history in schools, they try to normalize the correlation of like Columbus coming here, settlers, and don't tie that to settler colonialism and genocide. They kind of just like, oh well, Columbus discovered America and blah 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 blah. So yeah, it's kind of sad to see how we deal with that in society.
Well, I want to actually mention, and then I would love to hear what Salifu has to say about this, just in general. The whole issue with the police is interesting because weren't people just protesting the policing system due to the state-sanctioned murder of George Floyd? And then January 6, 2021 happens, and people are praising police for protecting these structures of oppression. Police got injured. Oh my goodness, these January 6 people are harming police. Which one is it? People are looking at, again, policing as these islands. I mean, aren't we still talking about Cop City? So people sort of idealize particular structures, and when they feel like it's something they support police. When it's something they don't support it, as opposed to, again, looking at a systemic structure. It's the same thing with these people who support fascism, racism, white supremacy. They have no problem with police being the judge, jury, and executioner for an African child. But when it comes to police protecting the structures of oppression that they don't want protected, then it's like, oh, I don't like the police. So which one is it? So people idealize particular situations they want instead of, again, looking at these systems, which oppress all of us, by the way. The police do not work for the people. They don't have to work for the people, and that is documented. The Supreme Court even states, we want to get to the Supreme Court, we could address that too, because a lot of stuff just went on with the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has supported the police system not supporting the people, because the role of the police is to support property. That is why the police did what they did, because it is property. So which one is it, people? Either you support the policing system or not. Anyway, so
Yeah, I think that there just has to be a lot more education done around what the primary contradiction actually is and like how it relates to secondary contradictions. Because I feel that education systems and the mass media sort of environment does everything it can to either avoid using the word imperialism or muddle what the definition of the word imperialism is to confuse people. But when you understand sort of that imperialism is the primary contradiction that exists in the world today, and that imperialism is not just, big country, big army, went to small country with small army, but that it is an outgrowth of capitalism, an outgrowth of finance capital that is exporting that capital into other countries and using economic systems, using political and economic and military strength to dominate the life inside of those countries. Then you understand that when we're talking about imperialism, particularly for colonized people who live in colonial countries, it's not this thing that doesn't impact you. It actually started where you are and grew so intensely that it ended up somewhere else, right? So we're clear about the definition of or a basic definition of imperialism, and we understand that is the primary contradiction. What we mean by that is that this is the greatest threat to peace and happiness and stability around the world. It is not to suggest that all other issues that exist in the world don't matter, right? It's not to say that, misogyny is not a big deal, homophobia is not a big deal, or as some kind of like hardcore Marxist-Leninist types sometimes do, say we need to focus on attacking this thing first, and then we can get to the other stuff. No, that's not what it means. But what it means is that we have to keep that primary contradiction centered in all of our conversations as we try to tackle and approach everything else. And so I think that those in power understand that by obscuring the meaning of imperialism or ensuring people never even have access to hearing the word, the root issues of the things that we are trying to address day in and day out never get solved. Because if we're keeping imperialism at the center of, I don't know, discourse on like gender and gendered violence, right? We would have to look to examples of people like the PIGC to figure out how you actually deal with those things in your society, you know, as opposed to like pop culture psychology and zodiac signs. If we kept imperialism at the center of like conversations about police brutality, then we wouldn't be able to just sit and like hyper fixate on what the newest video is coming out, because we would automatically make that connection to the military. So those are just like two small examples that I feel like kind of indicate very clearly why it is profitable to the ruling class to keep us not really thinking about the primary contradiction.
Well said, comrade. I know we pretty much been touching on this the whole time we've been talking about it thus far, but I kind of want to dive deeper, essentially by asking, like, why should we as organizers or just people focus on getting people to understand the primary contradictions as opposed to what the media does when hyperfixating on the secondary contradictions? Like, why is it so important that we emphasize that primary contradiction when talking to people or struggling with people?
Because when you understand the root of the problem, then the solution becomes clearer.
Yeah. Like Kwame Ture said, know your enemy. When you know what the issue is and where that source is coming from, you're more at a position to not divert at the other things that come out of it. So I think we have to look at the primary contradiction, because that's the ongoing thing. That's the thing that imperialism and capitalism is going extra to avoid talking about.
Mm-hmm. People are exhausted of hearing people spin their wheels around the secondary contradictions with no sort of understanding of the root cause. That's what all mainstream discourse is. That's all CNN, Fox, MSNBC, people on Twitter with their long ass threads. That's all people are doing. And it's exhausting because you're hearing the same discourse over and over and over again. And you're realizing day in and day out, you're not getting any closer to solving the root cause of the issue. But then here comes along a smart, knowledgeable organizer, hopefully somebody that is engaged in or thinking about getting engaged in a work study process with the A-APRP, wink, wink, and you understand these things on such a deeper level, I think that provides a level of clarity to people, even if initially it is frustration because they don't understand it. The better you get at breaking this stuff down, I think the more people appreciate hearing it.
A really good example is when people are talking about Russia and Ukraine, but there's no mention of NATO, which is at the root of this discussion. It should be the root of everything regarding this discussion.
Before I understood what the NATO role in the Ukraine war, it just sounds like all the other wars you hear about on the news, and oh, mankind is so violent. Why can't we get along? But no.
Didn't Rodney King say that? Why can't we all just get along? And then we understand the root cause of what happened to him.
Right.
But then the only soundbite that we got of is, can we all just get along, as if, you know, if we just hold hands and sing Kumbaya and eat Skittles, which, you know, you want to talk about Skittles. See that it's all connected to the system of police terrorism, isn't it? Even Skittles. It's really sad. Really, really sad. Skittles, rainbows are tied to police terrorism. Absolutely. Now you have police at these pride marches. Exactly. You can't get away from it.
Like Starbucks, you can't wear any rainbow related, any pride symbol, anything that's related to expressing any genderqueer identity is.
And look what's going on. People are organizing to unionize. See, right. It's all connected. No matter where you go on the map of this conversation, it's all gonna harken back to capitalism. No matter how you slice it or want to escape it, rainbows is still tied to capitalism. Rainbow capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Washing, right?
Yeah.
Girl boss. So the solution to our problems is just being a girl boss or having a gay business or yeah. And okay, let's get to the Supreme Court vote. They went on a fake lawsuit. Okay, do y'all know about that?
Yeah.
Where the lady, she created a potential website. So she's
a what website?
She's a web developer, but she created this case where it was potentially, someone who is gay would ask her for her services. So as your web developer, you custom make these websites for people. She brought up this whole case that potentially a gay couple would want to ask me to do their website for their wedding or whatever. I don't want that because of my religious beliefs. So she created this whole case, and the person she named was actually heterosexual and married to a woman, but she created this whole story around this potential for there to be someone who is gay asking her to create a site for their gay wedding. And the Supreme Court took up this case, and the majority supported that a business has a right to refuse someone who is queer. This is made out of a case that doesn't even exist. So this sets a precedent. This is the U.S. Supreme Court, which also said that affirmative action was unconstitutional, but yet you have these legacy people paying for their kids to go to college. That's a whole, and I think Harvard's being sued right now because of that. You had Roe v. Wade. You had just complete rights being rolled back. What happened in the midst of these cases that the Supreme Court voted on and made decisions on, you also have student loan forgiveness. That got rolled back because it's not constitutional. And yet you got old Clarence Thomas taking deals under the table. But that's okay. That's it. Didn't I say it was my last TED Talk? Oh my. But it's all connected. You got rainbows and all this. It's still connected to capitalism, no matter how you slice it. People who are more on the radical queer side, people on non-binary side, people are saying, at our marches, we do not want police because we do not feel safe. So those are immediate responses to that, a long time coming, especially when you know the history of Stonewall. The history of Stonewall was very much rooted in fighting and organizing against police terrorism. So the fact that these police are at these marches confounds me. But anyway, it all is connected to terrorism upon the masses, regardless of how you identify. I know people don't call me cis. That's offensive. Don't call me a person who gives birth. That's offensive. I'm a woman. All of this. All these laws that are being rolled back affect you too. And let me just say this, and then I am going to shut up. Wait, am I the only woman on this panel? But anyway, so when people say, I don't want you to call me a birthing person and all of this kind of stuff, when people say the words birthing person or people with uteruses or whatever, those are usually relegated to when people are talking about medical issues. I'm not going to sit here and have a conversation with Jesse and go, hey, Jesse, today I'm a birthing person. Who says that?
No one is saying that.
So they are increasingly working to create spaces that acknowledge that trans men sometimes give birth. So when you go, well, don't call me a birthing person. Not even every person who is a cis woman has the ability to give birth. So that is why they go people who give birth or birthing persons or whatever, because you're essentializing women, saying that by virtue of you being a woman, of course you can give birth. Do people not think about that? Of course they don't. They're so fixated on the word cis and birthing person or whatever, they do not think beyond the scope of that conversation. There are trans men, there are non-binary people who give birth. That is who these medical journals are acknowledging. When hospitals say, yes, we want to have gender affirming service to you, Why is that such a problem? That is not getting in your everyday way. These people are so fixated on, we're talking about the secondary contradictions and focusing on wokeness and all of this. These laws that you literally support, these blanket laws, which primarily target trans people and queer people, like the gender affirming surgeries, which most kids do not get, by the way. And DeSantis does not even support adults getting gender affirming care. Let's not, that's a whole other discussion. There are people who have severe acne that use these same meds that people who are trans may be taking. So now people who have severe acne who have been taking these meds now cannot get access to these meds. There are so many services besides termination of pregnancies that exist for people, the OBGYN, but they're so focused on that. And yet when these kids get born, oh, well, okay, whatever, we don't care about you. But these blanket laws, they don't care. So we have to understand the primary contradiction is capitalism, and there's an umbrella of all these other things. So when you celebrate and highlight patriarchy and anti-queerness, anti-transness, all of these things, they're also affecting you. So when you're saying go ban a book with lots of sex in it, you're also saying ban the Bible. And I know y'all ain't thinking about doing that. Because have y'all read Song of Solomon lately? I'm just saying. I'm just saying. They said they called Solomon the wisest man. I don't know. I mean, y'all not reading this stuff.
They're not reading it. And that's the thing. The system is not teaching you to do any further research. It's to trust them with the information.
Right.
So folks are not incentivized to dive further to see what's really going on.
Didn't they say in Genesis, the daughters got the father drunk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's okay. But having a book that supports someone who's mentally struggling because they're queer, that's not okay. But you have a book that talks about getting your father drunk. Okay, I ban the Bible then. I mean, obviously, I don't think you should, but come on. If y'all having these blanket laws, then ban the Bible.
So what would y'all say to the one, and like someone listening to this episode and being like, you know what? Yeah, like I agree. I think Biden is the primary contradiction. I just think we need to get rid of him and put in Trump or put in Kamala or whatnot. Or yeah, I feel like some of these legislators who are in office that are passing these like queer laws, yeah, they're the primary contradiction. We need to get them out and put someone in that's gonna like, because the queer person is the boogeyman in my neighborhood and who controls the resources I have and what I don't have and what I do have, whatnot. So what would y'all rebuttal be to that, or what would y'all say to that?
Sadiq, this is my last episode and you trying to make me talk a lot. This is stuff I think about a lot. I actually have this conversation in my head almost daily. I kid you not. This conversation in my head goes like this. It goes somewhat like what you said. And this is where political education comes into play. So when someone's focused on a candidate, because there's the vote blue no matter who, all of this stuff. And I've had these conversations and I just go, okay, so you want me to support someone who's pro-AFRICOM? I mean, you're saying you don't support one, but the other candidate also supports AFRICOM. You want me to support someone who wants to continue to fund $3 billion a year into Israel? Is that what you want me to support? Do you want me to support someone who continues to support the increasing funding of the militarization of the police? This is what you're telling me, right? You want me to support someone who does not support the collective ownership over the means of production. So this is what you're telling me. Just because Trump is one way, but you want me to support the other one when they literally support the same things in terms of imperialism. So this is literally something that I converse with myself every single day in my head. Okay, one is just as imperialist as the other, but you're not really looking at anything beyond the four walls of your own comfort. when people are talking about Roe v. Wade, I'm like, well, the U.S. supports policies that totally prevent reproductive rights for people around the world. Why are you okay with that? Just because of your level of comfort. Literally, this government, the U.S. government, is supporting particular coups in Haiti. What makes you think that I want to support someone who supports that? What makes you think that I want to support someone, again, who is fronting AFRICOM? And what makes you think that? So it is a variation of conversations I've already had, but it is something that rolls in my head almost every single day.
Yeah, like then you get those people who say, well, like, what has Haitians done for me? What has Palestinians done for me? Like, they haven't done anything for us, so why should we care about them, right?
Oh, brother.
They haven't done anything to me, so why should I even fixate on them, right? But my question would be in that is like, well, what can you do for Haitians yourself? You can't do anything because you're a colonized subject just like they are. So like, let's be real. Like, you don't do anything for them at the same time. So your government does stuff, even though you're not a, active participant in it. Like, they take your tax dollars to do what they want with it. So yeah, it's insane. And you hear people say this.
You can only walk around saying things like that when you don't understand the primary contradiction, which is what this episode is all about. Like, once you understand that, I think for people who have a really solid understanding of primary contradictions, the idea of solidarity becomes way more concrete and material than like feelings. I feel like Palestinians don't. And it's like, no, actually I used to love hearing Ajamu Umi say this all the time, because this is like, if you get Ajamu talking about this, you're gonna be in for a wild ride, because he will always be like, you don't know shit about what other people are doing. Actually, you don't, because you're not in an organization that's involved in any active coalitions with any other groups of people. So you need to shut your mouth. And I would be like, wow, he's actually so right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I actually have that conversation with folks as well. I don't say it like that. I think Jamu says it in a way that is perfect for Jamu. But I simply say I am so optimistic about what's to come because of me organizing. I know what other people around the world are doing. Right. And the response people usually have is, well, yeah, you're right. I'm not organizing, so I don't know. And so that's really the key of it, is once you start doing this level of organization and you're connected with people doing those things, then once again, we're going to win. If you are just sitting here watching MSNBC or whatever in a constant state of negativity, and you're on social media, whether it's liberal or whatever, and all you see is something that's within the four walls of even your social media account, and you do not go beyond that. If you don't even talk to people from other countries, you don't know what they're doing. And the people you do talk to from other countries have a class analysis, which is pretty aligned to this one that we're conditioned to have here. You're not going to get a different point of view. So most people are like, man, the human nature argument. Well, everyone has that capacity. If you give someone enough power, they're going to take it. And I'm sure you've all heard that one. It's like, okay.
Oh my God.
Societies that are more egalitarian where you don't have that.
Well, that doesn't exist.
Exactly. It's like, how do you know? How do you know? Right. And you're giving.
I have a friend from that country you're talking about, and they told me it's terrible. So, I'm going with what they're saying.
My question, because again, we've all had these conversations. My question is, okay, what's their class alignment? And then people go, oh, wait, yeah, okay, that's true.
Yeah.
These questions, people kind of go ad hominem and going back and forth and doing these circular arguments, and you don't need to. Like, there are simple questions. I'm telling you, and it will either shut a conversation down or have somebody going, yeah, you're right. I haven't researched as much. I don't know as much as you, or they just shut down. So the three things: Can you name me in 10 seconds or less what capitalism is? Since you defend it so hard, since you hate socialism so much, can you name in 10 seconds or less what it is? Well, people just shut down, their brain shuts down. If you defend something so hard, you should know how to define that in 10 seconds or less. The other thing is when people go about the person from the other country, what's their class line? What class alignment are they in? Well, you know. So yeah, you can shut down a conversation if you don't want to be involved. If you do want to be involved and have that with them all day, by all means, go ahead. Well, I don't have that much time in the world to go in circular arguments with people who have no idea what they're talking about and haven't studied. So you can shut that down and go, okay, can you tell me what that means in 10 seconds or less? Since you fought in so hard for it. Like, I know I hate capitalism because I studied it and I continue to study it. Simple as that. Not define something. People define,
I feel like I would add like a...
People define how much they love celebrity so much. And then they go, well, capitalism is great. It's like, okay, but you're sitting here telling me how your check was stolen from, and then you're saying you love capitalism. Like, help me out here. What's capitalism? I'm sorry.
I would no, I was gonna say I would add a third category to what you were saying about like people who shut down versus people how they go on about, like, there's another category where people just like are deep in their ignorance and just are very arrogant about it. Like, they don't care that they don't know and they're just gonna keep talking from those positions and they just keep doubling down. Like, well, I think essentially they know I don't know what I'm talking about, but if I speak about it confidently enough, then I feel better about what I'm saying, or what I'm saying has to be true because I just feel this way.
So how do you shut that down?
To be honest, I have very low tolerance for that. Like,
how do you shut that down? If you have low tolerance, what ways have you shut that down, or do you suggest people shut that down?
To be honest, I'm still trying to figure that out because, like, I am open with people who are like open to have honest struggles about, like, and being honest about what they know and what they don't. There's people who just don't know a lot, and then you start asking questions, and they just say something ignorant, and you try to correct it, and they just like, no, well, and they always try to find like different little rabbit holes to go down and like divert the conversation. And it's just like you said, you kind of go in a circle, and after a while, it's just like you just expended your energy so much. It's just like, where do we go with this conversation? Like, you're not trying to take anything from this. You're just trying to argue a point that you have no idea what you're talking about. So sometimes, to be honest, in some of those situations, I do just shut down. Like, all right, man, like, here's some resources. I may provide resources. Like, yo, you should read this. And most times than not, it's like they probably don't, or I'll probably ask them like, where are your sources from and whatnot, and then try to go from there. But yeah, those people are rough. But I think that's every now and again. At least I like to believe that. I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think having an arsenal of questions ready. Okay, where did you find that information? Can you define this in 10 seconds or less? And what class alignment are they in?
Yeah.
I'm just telling you my experience. You may all have had different experiences doing that same thing. In a lot of these exchanges, I will name names, I will name books, I will name sources. And people, I don't know as much as you about that. So yeah. Or yeah, can you name capitalism, what capitalism is, socialism is? Where did you get that source? And people either shut down and go, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, there are people. It's funny because I think John has talked about this, or like said this before, and like arguing with people, or like not arguing, but like going to struggle with people. And he said like, oh well, some people like, well, that's your truth, or that's my. It's like, no, there's no such thing as your truth. There's the truth, and then there's a lot. Like it's kind of black and white when it comes to that. It's like there's the truth, and then there's distorted truth, which is pretty much a lie. So you can't.
So my truth is that Abraham Lincoln did not sign the Emancipation Proclamation. That can't be true. You just said that everybody has a truth, right? There's no.
Yeah.
So in my truth, is that Abraham Lincoln did not sign that.
Exactly.
Right? That's my truth, right? Right? I'm just going by what you're saying.
That's facts. So another question I actually have here is, what we've been seeing in the global South, especially amongst Africans, where you talk about like Guinea-Bissau, whether you talk about Haiti, whether you talk about Mali, where the level of understanding those primary contradictions among the masses are very high. I wanted to ask, like, why are we not seeing that level of understanding amongst colonized people here, primarily Africans, to see clearly through those contradictions? And how do we get people to have that level of clarity or understanding of the primary contradictions as, many people in Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Mali, or Haiti as like examples, the masses of people understanding who the enemy is, who the revolutionary figures are, so forth and so on. Whereas here, people don't see through that, and they still look up to Obama or look up to Kamala or look up, engage in identity politics and whatnot, and not really understanding the primary contradictions as much.
One thing I would say is the material conditions of the people on the continent. They're getting it deeper and much more closer than a lot of folks here in the diaspora feel. And I think when you take into account seeing just that raw violence, it does something to encourage some sort of action taken. But I think it's also that folks here are not really connecting the dots because they don't understand that this is a global system. They think of it as an individual experience, and it closes off. And of course, we have all this propaganda showing us that, they need to work hard enough, or they don't have as many advances or whatever. There's a lot of confusion intended to dislocate people's memory about what's the real problem and how if the problem on the continent is not dealt with, then we're not going to see any results here. If Africa is not free, doesn't matter where we are, we're going to have the same issues.
I actually have a follow-up question because we've seen what's gone on in France. France is on fire. Apparently, they're saying that it's cooled down. I don't know. But an African was murdered by the state. Happens all the time here. But France was on fire as a result of that. I think there is a connection to the history there because even when dealing with pensions, Macron was going to raise the age of pensions, if I'm not mistaken.
Like 3 years or something.
Yeah, and France was on fire. So people talked day in and day out about the yellow jackets and all of this. So France has a history of being on fire, and yet people are murdered by the state all the time here, and people march in the streets, and sometimes there's revolts, but it's not as common. But they're Africans are 12%, 13% in the US, something like that, around there. So there's something to be said about the connection to Africa, where a lot of folks from the continent who are here, and people say this a lot about the Asian, quote unquote, Asian community, because people talk about the concept of the model minority. The thing is, Asians are not a monolith, just as Africans are not a monolith. No one's a monolith. So when they focus on this model minority in Asia, the focus is on the Chinese population and the Japanese population. They're not talking about people from the Philippines. They're not talking about people from Vietnam. They're not talking about these communities. I think in terms of France being on fire, there's the quote unquote migrant conversation. There's the conversation around material conditions. And here, when people talk about, well, Africans don't like us and they open shops, again, getting back to the question around class alliances. Where does this person stand in terms of a class analysis? And I think that's where you get the massive difference between what's going on in France and here. And it's not that like, well, France is just better because, I mean, as we've seen, France is also pretty white supremacist. So, but I think it's the concept around class alliances. It's the concept of the myth of the American dream. It's the concept of how Black capitalism will save us. And I don't think that illusion is as prominent in places like France or in the Caribbean or in Haiti, obviously, or in any other places where Africans are. You might say like maybe in Brazil, but I think these ideas about what it means to be a colonized person in a settler colonial area, I think that relationship to organizing against these oppressors is very different. And I think that's really where you're going to see whether or not a place is going to be on fire.
To answer your first question about how we increase that knowledge, I just think we have to be consistent. I think that every time these things come up, every time people are in distress, every time there's a new crisis, whether it's manufactured or it is authentic, we have to be always found talking about things through the lens of the primary contradiction. Because another thing that I have observed is that people recognize consistency. And so if you're ever backing away from it because you are trying to ease the message, or you're trying to tell a lie to gain more popularity or be more relatable, people notice those things. But when you're consistent, the connections and just the dots start to connect themselves.
Yeah, I think people start seeing it clearer for sure. So is there any last remarks on this topic in general, or any last things anyone wants to bring up or discuss before we close out?
We always remind everyone to join an organization fighting for justice and to get involved. That's the best way you can really consistently fight this enemy. You just can't do a one-time session or one-time study or research. I think every day, the more we study and every day, the more we develop our political education, we're more at the ability to fight and understand the multiple manifestations of the enemy. So stay contacted with us, stay contacted with our websites. We have our official website, A-APRP-intl.org. You can also check all of the other podcasts that are going on, from Our Ancestors' Voices with the John Mahumi. We also have the Forward Ever podcast, and we have our shop, Etsy Forward Ever shop, where you can get merchandise, supporting us there. Please, everyone, join an organization fighting for justice.
And as we always say, forward ever, backwards
never.
never.
Peace.